Okay, you've got 1 hour 15 minutes to answer paper 1, unit 1, Code War. Remember, you've got to do section A and section B. You've got to choose in section B 4A or 4B. Question 5 and 6 are worth the most marks, so get onto them very quickly. Leave yourself a good 40-45 minutes. Okay, section A is worth 16 marks, section B 37 marks. And in question 6, your final question, you get marked for spelling, punctuation and grammar. So proofread that your grammar, your punctuation and your spelling of technical terms is correct. So pace yourself. Here's a good idea of the timings. Pause this and have a look at it. I won't talk about it anymore, but I've given you some, this doesn't add up to 75 minutes, 1 hour 15 minutes. I've given you a couple of minutes on each question to plan out, especially the latter questions here. Plan out what you're going to say, what you're going to write about. Make sure you've got structure to your answers as well, with proper paragraphs and good conclusions. This is question 6, worth 13 marks. You've got to structure your work here. You've got to include these two underlying themes, the Berlin blockade and communism and capitalism. Okay, to explain why relations between the USA and the Soviet Union grew worse between 1945 and 48. And you must include information of your own. Okay, so you're writing to persuade here. Okay, what were the most important reasons basically for why the relationship deteriorated between the USA and Soviet Union? Some points that I would include would be the conferences, Yalta, Potsdam, 1945, increased growing tension. At the Tehran and Yalta conferences, Churchill, Stalin and Roosevelt had worked together, had built relationships and had mapped out a plan for post-war Europe. However, by the Potsdam Conference, you could mention there was a new American president. Whilst briefed on the earlier conferences, this new President Truman did not have the relationship with Stalin. And also there was a new British Prime Minister, Clement Attlee. That and the personal trust and understanding that was built up was now lost. Also, America had developed the atomic bomb by the Potsdam Conference. And this really, even though he didn't show it, upset Stalin, who was now clearly suspicious and untrusting of the British and the Americans. Therefore, this is really the start of the Cold War and the growing tension, and the atomic bomb is a huge part of this. You can mention too about Poland. The USSR had gone back on their word to include communist and capitalist in the Polish government. It was clear that Poland was going to become a puppet state of the Soviet Union, controlled by a communist government without free elections. So Stalin had broken his word, again showing the bitter divisions between the USA and the USSR. Many thought this could lead to a new war. But Greece in 1945, the Americans by 1947 had gone in and supported the Greeks, the monarchists, in their battle in the civil war to stop communism spreading. This showed that America was out to contain communism, stop it from spreading, and that Stalin, the Soviet leader, was out to increase his sphere of influence over the Eastern Bloc countries, Eastern Europe. Therefore, the relationship was already deteriorating between USA and the Soviet Union by 1945. You can mention the importance of the War of Words. By 1946, the leaders were talking about mistrust and viewing each other as rivals, enemies. Churchill's Iron Curtain speech in March 1946 reaffirmed that there was no love lost between the West, USA and Britain, and the USSR, the Soviet Union, in the East. Secret telegrams also made up the War of Words. The long telegram in 1946, a secret report from the American ambassador in Moscow, Kennan, stated that Stalin had given a speech calling for the destruction of capitalism, stating there could be no peace with the USSR, that is a USSA with the USSR, while it was opposed to capitalism, and that the USSR was building up its military power and the USA should seek to contain communism. On the other hand, Novikov's telegram in 1946, the Soviet ambassador to America, sent to Stalin said that America desired to dominate the world. Following Roosevelt's death, the American government was no longer interested in cooperation with the USSR, and that the American public was being prepared for war with the USSR. This war of words meant the Cold War was well and truly happening. Therefore, the Truman Doctrine was developed 1947 onwards by the new president of the USA, stating that the world had a choice between communist tyranny and democratic freedom. America had a responsibility to fight for liberty wherever it was threatened. America would send troops and economic resources to help governments that were threatened by communists. Communism should not be allowed to grow and gain territory. Therefore, it was the American foreign policy now, writ large, to police the world and to become almost the new United Nations, ending the USA's traditional policy of isolationism, showing that it seriously saw communism as a threat. And therefore, this is another reason for why the USA and the Soviet Union, why their relationship deteriorated. The Marshall Plan in 1947 also added to the bitter resentment between the two nations, in that the plan was to commit $13 billion of American money to rebuild the shattered economies of Europe. This would encourage prosperity within Western Europe after the economic hardship of the Second World War, and also help to rebuild the American economy. This was met with anger by the Soviet Union and the Eastern European countries. The Soviet Union had a sphere of influence now over the Eastern European bloc countries, and therefore refused the help of America. In contrast, 16 countries, including Britain and France, welcomed the offer, the Marshall Plan, and therefore there was two economic alliances clearly developing. The Comiform in 1947 and the Marshall Plan in Western Europe. Therefore, two spheres of influences, two camps in Europe, two armed camps, if we talk about the arms race and the race for the atomic bomb and the development of nuclear weapons, was clearly happening, straining the relationship to a very high level by 1948. Added to this, the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc, behind the imaginary Iron Curtain that Churchill talked about, was setting up satellite Soviet states. This was to rival the Marshall Plan. Countries such as Czechoslovakia, Hungary and Poland had puppet communist governments that were very loyal to the Soviet communist government. So therefore, Stalin and Russia, Soviet Union, kept control by making sure the Communist Party in each state had leaders that would obey Moscow. They created an atmosphere of fear and mistrust, so it was difficult for people to work together to oppose Soviet rule. Local police and army in each state would stamp on any kind of opposition. And the USSR, the Soviet Union, rationalised industries to stop satellites becoming self-sufficient. So one nation would be skilled at, say, shipbuilding, and another nation at developing the trucks or other type of steelworks. This meant that they were economically dependent on one another. The Cominform was also established in 1947 by Stalin, an international organisation that represented the communist parties across Europe and brought them under the direction of the USSR, the Soviet Union, rejecting the Marshall Plan and clearly showing that there were two official economic alliances in Europe by this time that would not work together, and therefore creating this fear climate of mistrust and suspicion between capitalism and communism. So whilst capitalism and communism had fallen out by 1945, there were two ideologically driven agendas in Europe. The Cominform, the Marshall Plan, the Truman Doctrine, the arms race were just products of this. They reinforced that this undercurrent of dislike and mistrust was already there once they defeated the common enemy of Nazi Germany. So when you're summing up and you're looking at the most important reasons, you've got to bear this in mind. And this slide here is how you would achieve a level 3. It's gain you about 9, 8, 9, 10 marks. They always pitch you in the middle of the level, and if you can evidence what you're saying, you will score higher. Okay, remember P paragraphs. P paragraphs if you make links between different causes. An example would be without the Marshall Plan, maybe there wouldn't have been the development of the common form. But both together, if you link them together, reinforced that there was already two armed camps, two alliances in Europe that mistrusted each other and disliked each other. I'd pause this now and just have a read through how this sheet here, how it explains the causes about why the relationships grew worse. This will be the highest level that you can gain. This considers a relationship between causes. It can only be achieved if the response has explained at least 3 causes. Okay, so where I've outlined different causes here, you've got to link them together and explain 3 causes, and make sure that you make explicit comparisons of the relative importance of 2 of them and come into a judgment. Compare them towards each other and which one's more important. Here's a good example. I think the fact that there are different systems and beliefs was the most important reason. Communism, capitalism, that underpinning reason for why there was mistrust and a deterioration in the relationship between the USA and USSR. As a result of this, there was a basic mistrust that had been reinforced by events in the war. So relations were bound to worsen, almost regardless of what happened. Certainly events like the Berlin blockade, 1948, reinforced the mistrust, but it was there anyway, and explained the Berlin blockade and what that was all about, and why Stalin had cut off West Berlin in June 1948, and the American response to that, and how it showed the strained relationship going to reaching it almost like a peak. I think you can hone in on the fact that East and West Germany were the central battleground for the Cold War. It's where it began, and where it really reached its crescendo by 1948 through the Berlin blockade, and why Stalin opposed the division of Germany, especially Berlin, which was deep in his own sphere of influence, his own East German zone, communist zone. But link this to the fact that communism and capitalism were deteriorating anyhow through the Marshall Plan, the Common Form, the Truman Doctrine, the arms race. Okay, so try and link them together to score as highly as you can. And remember, you get 3 marks for spelling, punctuation and grammar. Aim for this level. Candidates spell, punctuate and use the rules of grammar with consistent accuracy and effective control of meaning in the context of the demands of the question. So you're answering the question, but you're also spelling in technical terms correctly and using punctuation and grammar as it should be used. Proofread and make sure it all makes sense, and that any specialist terms that you use are spelt correctly, which is why it's really important to word wall or mind map the specialist terms and then learn them and write them with precision and accuracy. Good luck.